Hey everyone, and thank you for tuning in to what is part two in a six-part video series with us, Rantt, and the Center for Analysis of the Radical Right, where we'll be exploring various facets of radical right extremism, how we combat it, and essentially how we can move forward after this. So today's series is going to focus on online extremism, and we're going to go ahead and dive right in with our wonderful guest, Ashton Kingdon here, who is beaming in from nature at the moment. So,
yeah, from the outside, obviously.
so yeah, giving us all these vibes. So Ashton Kingdon is a Ph.D. candidate in web science at the University of Southampton, and she's a fellow at the Center for Analysis of the Radical Right, which is, of course, our esteemed partner. So how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you, and we're excited
Thank
to talk
you.
about this topic. You've been studying, your research focuses on essentially how right-wing extremists utilize technology for their recruitment and radicalization. So this has become obviously one of the most difficult challenges of our time. And so let's just start by giving us some background on yourself and kind of some of the key findings of your work.
Okay, yeah, so my PhD is in web science. A lot of people haven't heard of what web science is, so when I tell them, they're like, what? So it's an interdisciplinary PhD. So my research combines criminology, history, and computer science to analyze the ways in which far-right extremists utilize technology for recruitment and radicalization, look at the weaponization of history within far-right narratives, and the subcultural elements of radicalization. So my research at the moment, I've just come to the end, so I'm just finishing my PhD at the moment in the final few months, and I spent 4 years undercover online in different far-right networks. And I had 3 different identities, one as a radical right populist, one as a member of the Klan, and one as a neo-Nazi. And I infiltrated different networks with fake identities, to look at how different types of extremists were using technology for recruitment. And before that, I spent about 8 months undercover in Islamic State networks, seeing how they utilize technology for recruitment. In addition to that, my main research in terms of tech focuses on the risks posed by emerging technologies. So I've done a lot of work around artificial intelligence, machine learning, ethical and explainable AI, and the potential impacts that emerging technologies have if it gets into the hands of bad actors, and what we can do to try and prevent that.
That's excellent. Especially, I didn't even know that you went undercover. So that is really interesting. I'm gonna have to change up a lot of my questions on the fly here, because I'm really interested in learning more about that. So yeah, I mean, while you've been in these networks, so you went into, we'll just start there. So you went undercover, over the past few years, right? And you essentially went in, it's like you said, KKK and these various aspects. What platforms did you focus on targeting?
Okay, so with the neo-Nazis, I spent about 8 months on Fascist Forge. I used a archiving system to look at Iron March, because Iron March had actually shut down. So I used the Wayback Machine to look at that. And then another platform related to Fascist Forge called Siege Culture. I've pretty much been on every single Klan website that's ever existed, from way back when Web 1.0 in the early 1990s until the ones that are going now. And then in terms of more alt tech, I never really look at mainstream platforms that much. I did look at Instagram in relation to the Confederacy, but I usually just look at Gab, Parler, 8chan, End-chan, 4chan, I think I looked at as well. But my research mainly focuses on the hidden away, more niche platforms that are less looked at, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's important. We actually we ran a similar piece with one of our writers named Luke, who went undercover in like ByteShoot and Telegram. And like you said,
oh yeah, Telegram. Sorry, I use Telegram. Yeah.
It's these alternative tech, it's these alt platforms, like you call, alt tech platforms, not necessarily the mainstream ones, where a lot of these extremists are really, once they have you radicalized, it's like it's almost like they use the top, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, they use that as like the top of the funnel. And then they start to pull them in from there. So you first you start watching like a Ben Shapiro movie review or something, and then you start getting suggested, other extremist content, and the next thing you know, you're getting something from Steve Bannon's YouTube channel when he was on there still, and now you're getting invited into a Telegram like chat. So it's like they're using mainstream platforms kind of to market them into these more extreme siloed environments, right? Is that kind of what you've been seeing?
Not as much. So I've seen it on, I mean, a lot of the extremist organizations use Twitter as, like you said, the initial propaganda reach out. And the advantage, obviously, of platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter is that they have the ability to reach out, and then also the private function, so you can go into the chat. Now, what I saw as sort of Islamic State and also the identitarian movement is people advertising their telegrams on Twitter. So that is quite common. Now, actually, my research shows that the people that are on the extreme niche platforms have never been on mainstream platforms, nor would they be seen dead on those platforms. So they would not, even Gab, if you're from Gab, you are not allowed on the forum. Like, these are people that have had these beliefs generationally passed down, and they've had them for most of their lives. And that's why they're on these specific platforms. Yeah,
and I almost think, so in recent years, when you see, and a lot, like, there's obviously, I think, highlighting the fact that they have existed for a long time within these sometimes encrypted messaging apps, in these private alt tech platforms. They've been there for a while. They've had their established cultures. But I think what we've seen recently, especially with the lead up to the insurrection and with the mainstreaming of QAnon, how do you see these people, aside from like promoting their Telegram on Twitter, what tactics are you seeing people utilizing to kind of recruit and radicalize those who might not otherwise have stumbled upon their ideology, or people who might be right-leaning, a Trump supporter, and then suddenly they're storming the Capitol, right? Like, what kind of radicalization techniques have you seen online?
Okay, so I think that one of the consequences of taking Trump off of Twitter is that thousands and thousands of people flocked to Gab, and a lot of people that support Trump probably don't have extreme views. They've probably maybe just always voted Republican. That's the way that they vote. And then you run the risk of these people being exposed. Like Gab in particular is like a melting pot of disparate types of groups. You've got white supremacists on there, QAnon, big QAnon communities. Obviously, you've got Trump supporters, but you've also got Klan people on there, traditional white supremacists. So obviously you run the risk of exposing them to these new ideologies because they're amongst much more radical people. But I very much don't subscribe to the technologically deterministic view that technology is the problem. I think society is what is the problem, and that technology can act as an accelerator. But I think it's what's happening politically, economically, socially that's actually the problem here. Like, so I think it comes down to everything is so uncertain at the moment. People are spending more time online because of the lockdowns, because of the pandemic. A lot of people have probably lost their jobs. They're searching for things that these groups can offer. And I think that the conspiratorial QAnon anti-government rhetoric appeals to those people more because of what's going on in society, not because they've just happened to use a technology, if that makes sense.
No, that does make sense. I think essentially what you're saying is, I mean, technology isn't the thing that's radicalizing people. It's what's going on in society.
It can be an accelerator.
Yeah, it can be an accelerator.
Yeah, but it's not. I always look at the socio-technical. That's the whole point of my research. So looking at things in combination with one another, and looking at them equally, and not thinking that if we just implement. Often I think with counter radicalization, it's kind of we'll use a more technical solution to fix a problem that we think is being caused by tech. So we'll just deploy more AI, we'll tighten our belts on machine learning, we'll get more content off, when those people aren't going to disappear.
Exactly, because I think you're right. it's not the cause, it is the accelerant, because what we're seeing is essentially these societal issues that exist. We see, you know, especially in America, the underpinnings of racism that have, you know, been permeated in our culture for centuries. And then, you know, what me and William talked about in the last interview was, you know, kind of Trump giving license to hate, and, you know, some of the stuff that happened in public that kind of bubbled this up. And then I think you're right, because what it is, it's a human problem. And then I think what it is what technology can do to resolve it is essentially, it's not that technology is the cause, it's that those kind of things that they put in place can slow the acceleration, essentially. Like if Facebook had done a better job earlier on, for example, less people would have fallen into disinformation, less people would have potentially been susceptible to this. So essentially, it's kind of like putting a band-aid on some of the broader problems. Like counter extremism is a multifaceted approach. You can't just only, you know, just try to deploy AI at the problem. You have to also address what's going on here. So, you know, speaking of that, on the front of specifically these online platforms, you know, because like while people have, like you said, one of the aspects of removing Trump from Twitter, you know, that they have been, you know, deplatformed. Do you think deplatforming is a good strategy, or are you concerned about these people moving over to more, you know, these encrypted apps?
Deplatforming is kind of a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because when I teach this to university students, I always talk about, in a sense, it's kind of, and you can trace this back to Al-Qaeda, when they used to take the Al-Qaeda websites down and they were like fruit flies. They would have like mirror sites just waiting to pop back up. And it's like, on the one hand, the argument is that people don't cease to exist because you remove them from a platform. So the risk, and a lot of literature on ISIS looks at this, is that they move to Telegram and you can't track them as easily. So actually, is it safer to have them on the mainstream platforms where we can monitor what they're doing? But even if you're deplatforming them and they move elsewhere, you are still taking out a huge amount of propaganda that could potentially get people, like if you think of it, I know like Moghadam's staircase to extremism is a good example. If you're on the first step and you're maybe just liking some memes or some images, some pictures, commenting here and there, if you take that out, then that is helpful. And the whole point of comparing it to whack-a-mole is if you don't whack the moles, then you're going to get overrun, right? So I think that deplatforming is a good strategy because it takes that out. But the consequences are, obviously, like you were saying, they move to more extreme alt-tech niche platforms where they could be exposed to more propaganda, to more extreme views. And the strategies from social media companies to remove the content are really poor. And I think COVID really highlighted this, how bad they actually are. So I think that there's only so much you can do to an extent if you're not going to invest the infrastructure and time to combat it properly. So exactly. I think two sides to it. And, you know, so one of the things that I do is I get asked all the time, why don't you just take the platforms down? Like, because when I present on Fascist Forge, people say all the time, you know, why is this still up? Why can't you just remove it and remove these people? And I use software called Multigo, which is data mining. And what you actually show from Fascist Forge, for example, is they were cyber squatting many domain names in the Cayman Islands, so that as soon as they come down, they have a space to go. And that's the people on that platform were really, really, really radical. Like, they were calling for acts of terrorism. There were recruiters on there from 7 of the most sort of extreme neo-Nazi groups. They've disappeared now because they've been taken offline. So it's like, where have they gone?
Right? Where have they gone?
Where
maybe
are they? And that's what I'm waiting to find.
Yeah, maybe some Telegram group, because, you know, one of the benefits, like it's interesting, right? It's great to deplatform them from mainstream platforms, so it stunts their propensity to radicalize other people. It slows the spread of their propaganda. There's that benefit, but like you say, they can go onto these other platforms, and then once they're on these alt tech platforms, if you deplatform them from their alt tech platforms, then it's like, where do they go, right? And then, but they're organizing somewhere. And the key, and one of the benefits of kind of not deplatforming them from the alt tech platforms, like let's say, you know, not Telegram housing them, it's kind of like a AP wire for the FBI. You know, I mean, you might as well just throw an agent in there, and you can monitor. It's like you have an intelligence line straight into their rooms. Because what I've seen, from what I've heard from various people is that the FBI is in a lot of these Telegram groups.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah,
journalists are in a lot of
sure.
these Telegram groups.
Yeah.
And people are watching what's happening. So like, it's almost, if they were to be off of Telegram or off of, you know, these other platforms, like you said, where are they on the dark web somewhere? Are they using like, so like, are they using, well, not dark web, but are they using, just where are they, right? So that's another challenge. So I'm sure there's like there's so many layers to deplatforming. Do you think that so like you said, once you know, Fascist Forge disappeared, that's a concern to you, right?
Yeah, it's a concern to me because for a start, these sorts of platforms that I look at are so different to what most people would research. So to actually become a member on Fascist Forge, you have to sit an exam, right? And this is the way that they weed out the feds, because there's people on that forum that are on FedWatch constantly. And if you will get doxxed, basically, publicly, if they find out that you're undercover. So you have to sit a really intense exam. Now, for ethical reasons, I'm a researcher at a university. So I'm bound by certain ethical considerations that, say, someone like Julia Ebner wouldn't need to follow, because she does a lot of really fascinating research on going dark and things like that. And I can't do those sorts of things. So I couldn't sit this exam. So I have to watch from a surface level, right? But to get into the chats, you have to sit this exam. And to do that, you would have to have serious knowledge. Like, you have to read all of the literature. There's like a team of people that mark the exams, and that's the way that they weed out spies, basically.
And law enforcement is watching this, right? They're aware of this specific group.
I don't know if they're watching it. I presented my research at a conference that was for the Prevent overview in the UK. So they were reviewing the Prevent strategy to sort of update it and combat far-right extremism. I'm sure Sean will tell you all about this. And I said, on this platform, there's 283 full members that have sat this exam. And there was like 1,118 people like me that are like on the platform but haven't gone through this process. Now, the people on the platform that had passed this exam were the people that you would never think: primary school teachers, paramedics, eugenicists. So wow. Like that, yeah, it was mental. And these are the people that are the full kaboom, like have passed this exam. And to pass the exam, you have to have read all of the literature you can think of. Everything you can think of that's a far right book is on the list. Siege by James Mason, George Lincoln Rockwell, Mein Kampf. And the questions are really anti-Semitic. What are your thoughts on Jews? What are your thoughts on homosexuals? And certain people obviously are not allowed on. You're not allowed on if you're female. You're definitely not allowed on if you're not pure Aryan, and you have to kind of prove your blood.
Wow, this is
it's hardcore. And I said, so I tell people, like, my job as a researcher is not to take that down. You present your research to the people that can, right? And say, look, like we did before Christchurch.
And where's this based?
Where's it based?
Yeah, like, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Like just for the context of where do you think most people are? Like, who are joining?
No, so they're everywhere. They're everywhere. So the biggest cell in the UK was in Cornwall, which I thought was interesting. A lot of people from the States, Australia. It's hosted, so the domain name was purchased in the States, but it's actually hosted in the Netherlands. You can use software called Shodan, which tells you where the server is. which is interesting because when you try and take it down, and of course it goes through Cloudflare, obviously. So I said, like, here's the evidence, I've data mined this, and then I use this software called Sherlock, and what you can do is enter the username, and then it tells you where they are all over the web. Every single social networking site they're signed up to, it'll give you a hyperlink. And what you see is that they have communities on very unique platforms. One of the big ones is Discord. 30% of them came to Fascist Forge through Discord. And a lot of them knew each other in real life. And then the risk is that you see them all, you see them making these sales, you see them moving offline, and you're like, this is a problem.
Where did they go? Yeah.
Because when they explain why they're there, they tell you that this is something that is generational. They have always had these views. This is not a Trump thing. It's not a Brexit thing. They've had these views for a long time, and they want action. And they don't think that even a Trump government can deliver what they want. So, and they don't like the alt-right. They call them Walmart nationalists.
Yeah, because these are the extreme, a lot of people, when they think, right-wing extremists, like, as you know, I know, given, I've just working with CARR, I've learned so much while publishing these articles and really diving deep. And even then, I didn't even know about this specific group. But like, it's just, there are extremes that are even further right than, like, as you say, Trump's people, because when a lot of people in America are thinking right-wing extremism, they're thinking the people at the Capitol. And yes, while some of those people who were in these groups may have been there as well, there are also extremes that are like, this is a real problem. This is something, like you said, those people in these specific groups are the ones to really be concerned about, because they're talking about taking action. They're talking about, these are actual terrorists.
You've got the recruiters on there. So I identified recruiters from Atomwaffen Division, Sonnenkrieg Division, I forget what it's called, but the French version of that division, Anti-Pedient Resistance, Skydus, and they are open as well. And then the people, I'll have to send you the presentation because I call it Tinder for terrorists.
We're going to have to do an article on this at some point,
How they're advertising. That's interesting, because I have so far refused to give up the data, because as far as I'm aware, I'm the only person that's got it, and everyone's been like, oh, let's do something. I call it Tinder for terrorists, how they're advertising themselves to the recruiters, and that is as propagandists, as people that can reach out to different people from different countries. So if you're bilingual, you're in. If you've got computational cybersecurity skills, you're in. If you have knowledge of chemical warfare. So 10 people on there were like experts in chemical weapons and all of this crazy science stuff. Gnarly.
This clearly needs to be on, this clearly needs to be at I know you presented that research, but this definitely is one of those things where law enforcement hope that they're like, especially in the US too, like, I hope, because like, this is one group, right? So you were in others. So in some of the others, was this the most concerning, or there were others that concerned you as well?
Fascist Forge is the most concerning, because like I said, it was so what you do is when you sit this exam, you fill in this questionnaire, and that's what I analysed. And on the questionnaire, it was things like, why do you want to join? How did you hear about us? Where do you live? What's your age? What are your thoughts on this, that? What's your profession? All of this information. And that's when I was saying, like, these are not your QAnon, you can identify them at a Trump MAGA rally, or Proud Boys, or, something with a symbol. They're not the sort of neo-Nazi groups that would go out into the streets and protest. Like I said, these are people that disappear into society and masquerade behind traditional professions, trustworthy professions, and they have really, really insidious and terrifying views. And as I said, I think 7 people out of 283 were calling for acts of terrorism. And that is a really small group to have that many people openly out there saying, and I think 18 were calling for like offline mobilization. But but there's only so much you can do. Like I've had to phone the police a few times over the past year because I've seen on Gab that people are infiltrating protests in London. And I'm like, yo, just a heads up. And they don't take it seriously. They kind of laugh at you. But you know, you sit at home and you think, oh, if I don't say something and something happens, I'm going to feel terrible. So you end up saying like, oh, you know, I've seen these discussions, and the police just kind of laugh and they're like, oh, you know, so what?
So, you know, on that point, you know, as much as I want to, I'm probably going to have to, we're going to have to do a whole separate thing on Fascist Forge specifically, because now I'm just asking questions selfishly because I just want to know more about it. But we can move on to this next point, because now I think, like you said, you try to call the police, you try to alert authorities on these issues, these things are happening, organizing publicly on social media. So what do you think social media can do to combat some of this public extremism, and also to be more effective in alerting law enforcement? Because as we've seen, it seems to not be proactive, it's retroactive. Facebook shuts down groups after the Stop the Steal rally is already organized. They shut down talk after a terrorist attack occurs. They're never proactive. We rarely
the horse
hear
is out of the stable.
We rarely hear a story of Facebook halts reports terror. You know, like no, they don't save the day preemptively. So what do you think that they could do? Social media.
Well, I have to say I'm really a negative Nelly on this subject, and whenever I do these kind of interviews, I'm always just like, there's no hope. So I argue that social media companies need to talk about their technologies. Okay, this is my whole issue with ethical and explainable AI. So they're never going to do that because it makes them too much money, right? And it's for advertising, for business. Now, what they need to do is be transparent about how their technology works, so that ordinary human beings that don't necessarily understand the intricacies of deep learning algorithms and the black box of AI can make sensible decisions about the content that they're being exposed to. Now, I know they've attempted things like this with like flagging content. It might be conspiratorial, but the vast amount of ordinary people have absolutely no idea how AI works and how much information is being exposed to them through algorithms. And I know with Cambridge Analytica, it kind of let the cat out of the bag a bit, but the social media companies need to be transparent about how their technologies work. And I talk about this as AI as a socio-technical system. So it's not about revealing one process, like, oh, here's the data. Like, no. I want to know who's making it, what data's going in, what's being spat back out, what's going on in the middle. And they won't do it. They will never have, they would need to have outside regulators come in and look at their AI.
And that's and it seems right now there's a big push for regulation. As we see, Facebook's been running these ads. I'm not sure if you've seen some of them where they're calling for regulation on themselves, and they're saying oh, the internet's changed, so why hasn't tech regulation? And I don't trust them. I feel like it'd be watching an NRA ad calling for gun reform. Like I don't believe that they're genuinely serious about wanting to be regulated. So like, what regulations now on that front? What regulations do you think? I know Elizabeth Warren is serious about this. A lot of other people within the, there's actually some bipartisan appeal on regulating tech, obviously for different reasons, because Republicans and people on the right in general think that they're being suppressed. But for the Democratic administration and Biden and those who are interested in actually solving this problem, what advice would you give them, potential regulators, on how to address some of the biggest issues you found during your research?
Yeah, so I think the main thing that we prepare people for, and it kind of came out in the Quantum article a bit, is I feel like with the web, Tim Berners-Lee, so basically the person who created the degree that I have, he never thought that anyone would ever use his invention for evil. And when you hear him speak, he's like completely traumatized by the fact that cyber criminals. So it's not just terrorists, it's cyber criminals. You know, lots of people use the web for nefarious purposes, trafficking, organized crime, shebang. And he was kind of like, we had no idea that this was going to happen. And then you see it with AI, like AI is taking over the world. People are completely obsessed with it, right? But now, because there's been no kind of ethical regulations, all of these terrible things are happening, and it's an aftermath. So what we're saying is prepare yourselves for the rollout of new technologies, and think about the potential harms of those. So like even 2 weeks ago, you saw like Stuxnet 2.0, right? And they're messing with the centrifuges again. And it's like preparing yourself, making people aware of these potential issues before they arise, so that in 20, 30 years time, we're not having a conversation where there's been a catastrophic act from like quantum technology that people haven't been prepared for before it's rolled out.
Yeah.
But I think like what we were saying at the beginning about, we can't just rely on like technological solutions. It's in America, they've never put that much money into kind of counter radicalization programs. And, you know, with QAnon, more focused towards mental health, early interventions, things like that. So it's not just a kind of let the social media companies deal with it.
Of course.
And regulate it. And then obviously we've discussed that they're going to be unlikely to do that because they want the money.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're right. Yeah. Because I mean, social media companies aren't going to regulate themselves, you know, and it's one of those things where I'm glad you brought up the proactivity and quantum computing, because I want to talk more about quantum computing as well. Because I'm before I even worked, you know, ran and kind of content and media. Me and my co-founder Zach also worked in tech. So like I have a tech background. So I actually did.
Very cool.
Yeah, I did like shit. You know, I worked in a Microsoft like engineering role, basically doing SharePoint stuff. So I'm all in.
Yeah.
I'm like that's where my head is at before, you know, it's like politics and tech. So essentially, like I really think it's because one of the problems in America, especially, is that it's like what Biden was talking about in his you know the joint session of Congress. Like we need to be preparing for conquering these next frontiers of technology, whether it's AI, whether it's quantum computing. And and you're like, I think these proactive regulations, because right now, like everyone's just so focused on this week or this month, or like how do we stop this attack, or how do we prevent X thing? Or we need to learn from the past 10 years of social media, the past 10 years of tech. Like we know what we need to regulate on social media. We just need to get that out the way, and then we need to start thinking about, like you're saying, putting preemptive regulations for the technology over the next 10 years. You know, people aren't even thinking about virtual reality. You know, how those social, how that's going to come into play.
Oh yeah. So one of the platforms I look at is actually VR chat, and the way that is used for radicalization, particularly on the far right. And one of the issues is that you can't police live chat.
Exactly.
And and then it's like, you know how sometimes you'll get someone will reach out to you and say, you know, we want to talk about radicalization in gaming. It's a big thing at the moment.
Yeah.
You would have to create a really sophisticated sock puppet account and gain the trust of these people to enter the server to get anything meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
And it, like you said, it's not just a case of Web 2.0 now. We're talking about AI, we're talking about virtual augmented reality, like the links between gaming. You've got more of a risk to youth now than ever before, because they're using, like, we've got the Internet of Things, like, you know.
Yeah. And then shortly after that, like that's like now, and then quantum computing will be the thing, you know, after the thing that's full, like once that's like fully prevalent, like that's going to really change the game, as you've noted. And it's just, we don't hear, because we're so focused on just trying to agree, because there's such a disagreement on commonly agreed upon facts. We're not even like, these are the conversations we should be having. We're not talking about these solutions or forward thinking, because we can't even clean up the messes that have been made. And so let's dive into, I think, because I'm really interested in the quantum computing aspect, and I think our that article was fantastic. I just for our audience, people who are watching who may not even know what quantum computing is, if you just give us like a broad overview of like, you don't have to define quantum computing, but just just to discuss why do you think this is a concern, and and we should be doing more forward thinking regulation, more forward thinking approaches in government and in private industry.
Yeah, so my colleague Julian is actually the brains behind the quantum side of things. So he is same as me, last year of PhD, and he's looking at this whole quantum arms race between China and the US, right? So it's back to these nation states getting a jump start on these revolutionary technologies and what they're going to be able to do with it. So essentially, I don't know how much computer science I'll go into, but things are coded between a 1 and a 0 usually, so binary. And the idea is that quantum internet, or they call them qubits, so they fit within both. So they're like smaller than a 1 and a 0, and they fit within both. So to cut a long story short, these computers can process tasks and do things millions of times faster than ordinary computers. And I think actually in my colleague here, if anyone's interested in this topic, definitely check him out, Julian Krauss. His statistics, I think, said that it was what a quantum computer could do in 200 seconds would take an ordinary computer something ridiculous like 2.8 billion years to accomplish the same task. It's like crazy statistics. And they also make for unhackable networks, right? So in relation to the far right, what we were saying is not only if this got in the hands of a nation state, you could have really severe consequences. And you know, when you tell people that don't know about Stuxnet, for example, or I can't remember what the name of the operation was, but do you remember when they were hacking into everyone's phones at Al Jazeera? Like these kind of like really big, I can't remember what the name of it was, it's got a funny name, these really big cyber attacks, and you know, they can shut down infrastructure, they can shut down power, like it's insane what they can do with technology. It's not just about that, like the potential implications of a nation state having this technology, it's about regulating it. So multi-stakeholder approaches to regulate the technology for good, right? So everything we do at Southampton is all about AI for good, ethical AI, regulations that benefit society so it can't be used for, you know, negative purposes. Like with the quantum internet, if it come to the point where ordinary people, which I think would be decades away yet for an ordinary person to have access to this technology, you could be talking about people having unhackable networks. So for example, when they managed to get in and see who was behind the insurrection through Parler, that would never happen. You could disseminate and have a propaganda campaign that would be completely off the charts. If you wanted to have a disinformation propaganda campaign, it would be like something you've never seen before. So it's basically, that was a kind of like dystopian, I was going to say utopian, like what might happen after it gets into the hands of bad actors, because we've seen the negative impacts of the technology that have had on cyber criminals, because I don't just look at extremism, I look at cybercrime more generally as well. And it's always a kind of, oh, we should have really listened and picked that up. And
exactly, like, well, one of the things we're kind of seeing, the trends is, you know, maybe people should start listening to the experts when they make warnings. I mean, that kind of seems to be the biggest lessons we've learned, especially with COVID. Listen to what experts are saying, yelling about climate change, COVID, these technological issues. You know, people have been, you know, and it's one of those things where like technology specifically, like seeing these like you said, it's not the tech itself, it's there's these issues we know are problems within humanity. We know that this depravity exists, so we need to, you know, you don't create a knife with no handle, right? You don't create tools without protective measures.
But have you actually seen those knives though? Because they had a whole thing in the UK.
Oh
yeah, like the bladeless knives.
I haven't seen the bladeless knives, no. So there's a, well, yeah, but basically, so what's going, what's going on with that?
I don't know. I can't actually remember. I'd have to look it up. But there was definitely some sort of conference I saw where there were bladeless knives.
Well, I mean, I think like for the analogy's sake, it's like one of those things where you don't create these tools without safety protocols, right? You don't give out any tools because they're dangerous. You tell people, hey, you give them scissors and you say don't run with the scissors. You give people platforms, you give people things. You should do the same with tech. Technology can be used like any tool for good or for evil. You can use a knife to cut meat, or you can use a knife to stab someone, So same with technology. And I think when we have this huge, like the world is going to change more radically than over the next 10, 20 years than it did in like the last, century. I mean, like it's going to be wild what happens over the next few decades in the technology space, especially in computing. And, like we have these extremists that are going to come and potentially utilize this, but also, like you said, the nation state aspect, the quantum arms race between us and China is one thing, but I also I think Russia is one to watch too, because given how more desperate they become, I don't think they have the capability at the moment. I mean, you know more about that than I do probably, but they're desperate, right? And their only means of lashing out at the moment seems to be cyber. So do you have concerns of Russia?
Their hackers are insane. Like you got Cozy Bear, Fancy Bear, Every Bear. Like it's got really sophisticated cyber crimes going on. Like I teach cybercrime for MSc, and the case we did last week on espionage was the Cozy Bear COVID vaccine hacking. And like you were saying, it's not just a case of an individual bad actor using technology for recruitment, like on a one-on-one basis, which is obviously a concern, but you've got bigger concerns such as how our nation's using this technology, and it's to attack healthcare, it's to attack education, like, and they get in and they disrupt everything. And we're talking about, like, for example, the WannaCry attack, how much damage that caused. It's dangerous. And there's the problem that nobody can regulate something that will be the same. And that is the problem, isn't it? Because people want the competitive edge and they'll want to use the technology because it can do so much good for the nation as well. Like, by no means am I saying that these technologies are just negative. Like, obviously they've got incredible benefits, especially if you look at AI and how AI helps at certain sectors, healthcare, transport, climate change, things like this. But you do have the bad actors, and it's getting people to listen to the evidence and actually take it seriously, which is not going to happen because Silicon Valley, man.
Silicon Valley, man. I mean,
no.
it's it was a great idea at first, having a bunch of young people, creating these technologies. I mean, I'm 28. I always was like, oh, I was inspired by these young people, creating these technologies, but maybe they need some regulation if they're starting these brand new.
They need some rules.
Zuckerberg clearly needed, he was not thinking. I think one of the best parts about what we've seen, well, obviously, if there is a best part of the horrible things we've seen over the last decade in technology, is lessons learned. When people create new platforms, it's like, that's why I'm not sure if you've used Clubhouse, or I'm sure you've seen it, but
no, I've not used it, but I've heard about this. I don't actually know what it is. What is it?
So it's this. I don't want to actually throw some bias out there. I was about to call it a mediocre space, but it's this space where you can create audio rooms, invite only. It's in beta. You create audio rooms and you discuss with all these people. All the venture capitalists are in there, investors are in there.
Oh, right.
Tech people. That's how it started, and then suddenly a wave of and then the Black community made it popular by joining, and then suddenly all these racists swarmed in, and now it's just unmitigated.
Oh, shocking.
Now it's just unmitigated. Yeah. But the thing is, like, the founders aren't really doing much about it. And it's one of those things where in my opinion, if you're creating new tech platforms, if you're creating new technologies, do you agree that this should be everything we've discussed today, how extremists and bad actors could misuse this tool should be at the forefront of your mind when creating the tools themselves? Because as we've seen, it's just one of those things where we know now that there was that time during the golden era where everyone thinks, oh, this new tech is going to just lift up democracies and everything's going to be beautiful and wonderful and sunshine. But as we see, that's just not the case, because there's greatness in humanity, and there's also depravity, and we need to be mindful of that when creating these tools. So I think definitely in moving forward, new technologies, new VR platforms, new AI functionality, new quantum computing tools, everything needs to be crafted within the technologist's mind. They need to be thinking about how do you prevent bad actors from abusing it, because I feel like that's been missing over the last
I'll have to send you the cards I have, the ethical AI cards. They basically talk about everything that you said, and how when people need, so like when we talk about algorithmic bias, it's about the fact that in computer science, who's making the algorithms, who's getting the data, like quite a lot of the time there's not much diversity. I mean, there's barely even any women, let alone people of color. And it's like, can you even understand those sorts of biases if you're not from those communities? And I don't think you can. So if it's biased from the offset, I think people think about technology as if it's somebody's there. Do you know what I mean? Have you ever heard one of your friends say, oh my God, I was just talking about bread.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I got an advert or something like that. And they think that someone's listening to you, but you're like, no, this is the AI. And when you kind of explain that everything that you have is connected.
Yeah, you have the cookies online that feed into this.
Yeah.
You know.
Everything. And then it's like when you even explain the sort of implications of having an Alexa.
I need to unplug mine. She's over there. She can hear this whole conversation. She's probably telling Bezos everything, but go ahead.
But yeah, I think it's personally what I argue all the time is it's about explaining AI to the masses in a simple way that they can understand and take precautions to the stuff that they're seeing. If we're going to try and prevent disinformation and conspiracy theories, I mean, I always think that governments are kind of 15 years behind the time, like they're only just focusing on the far right now. Meanwhile, male supremacism and QAnon conspiracy is going nuts. And I think it'll be in 10 years time, they'll think, oh, should we maybe review and, try and combat that?
Exactly. Yeah. And you're spot on. That kind of like, is one of the messages I'd probably want to, people to take away from this interview is that, there's a need for proactive thinking that's just missing across governments. And this goes to, and I keep pointing to Biden's joint address, because I thought it was wonderful, because he's right. Like, this all ties into the definitive battle of our time, which is, of course, obviously there's climate change and all the other challenges, but democracy versus autocracy, and whether or not this can work. Because what China is doing in their authoritarian nation is they're moving very effectively because they don't have dissent, right? They don't have
pushback.
Yeah, they don't have Xi doesn't, she's got his thought in the Constitution. He doesn't have another party on the other side saying, oh, well, you know what, Xi, maybe you shouldn't do that. Here we have Biden saying, I want to solve these problems. Democrats saying, I want to solve these problems. Republicans saying, these problems don't exist. The sky isn't blue. Gravity doesn't exist. Climate change isn't as big of a threat as you think. Like, we're seeing, so it's one of those instances where we have to prove, democracies have to prove that we can still move effectively and proactively. Because I have a feeling if we were more, if our country was less divided, we would be able to, these conversations like you and I are having would be what people are talking about on cable news segments. They would be what people are talking about in Congress, instead of debating whether or not there are Jewish space lasers striking California, or whether or not there are pedophiles siphoning the life elixir from children in Congress. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I couldn't even think of a question after that. I stunned myself.
QAnon it's something else, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It's something else.
Yeah, it is, and one of these, so essentially I would love to talk about this for the next, I'd love to have this a 5-hour segment if we could. Because obviously, as you could tell, this is something I love technology, and I think about this all the time. And this is your work, and I would love to definitely have you on again at some time. And we're gonna have a panel too at the end of this.
Yeah.
So that'll be great. But before we kind of close this out, are there any final thoughts or any things that you'd like to discuss, or any?
I actually forgot what was your main question of this whole segment?
Well, the whole interview was just it was a broad focus on just online extremism in general.
Yeah.
And because like we did kind of bounce around, but it all fits within the same meld, right? It was an ongoing conversation just about how online extremism is proliferating, and alt tech, mainstream social media, and also what people aren't talking about, quantum computing, various technologies, and how they can be abused by extremists.
So so if I could sum up my work, I would say I look at the places that other people don't want to, because they're grim. I can literally say that. I think that we need to have serious conversations about AI, accountability, transparency, ethical AI, explainable AI, not just in terms of extremism and disinformation, misinformation campaigns, but also in terms of warfare, particularly as we have increasing amounts of autonomous weapon systems coming out. We need to think about who's responsible for that when it goes wrong. The ethical implications of AI are something that's very important, because you can't just slot ordinary ethics into technology. You can't just like the ethics of life, splat. No.
Yeah, precisely.
It's really something that people need to, think about. And as we have more technologies on the horizon, it's about getting people to pre-plan for that. So like, it's all well and good being like, we need to sort of address this as a country, but you need to then actually do something. But I would say that I think now more than ever, there's a big concern for me about the danger of conspiracy theories on mainstream platforms. Instagram's a big one. When you see like the Mummosphere, my colleague of mine at CARR does a lot of work on the mummy bloggers and QAmoms, and how they radicalize to violence. And I saw the other day that in the LA Times that a woman drowned her children who had been like radicalized through QAnon and had mental health concerns. And I think the paper that Ashley and I are working on is about this, and unexpected criminals in offline spaces. So the way that the online comes offline and infects the people you wouldn't expect. But I think that's a big problem in America and the UK. QAnon is crazy. And I think statistics show that 1 in 4 people believe in some sort of conspiracy in relation to QAnon, like something under the umbrella. Because
that's one of the things with QAnon, is that there's so many facets to it. If you look at their great, awakening chart, and you see.
Oh, have you seen it?
I've seen it. It's
the poster. Oh,
it's everything's all interconnected.
I know.
and you can hear people don't even realize they believe in it sometimes. They just believe in facets of the QAnon conspiracy, and they're also interconnected. They don't even realize, like, they'll say something off the cuff about Bill Gates and not realize that they're feeding into Gates. One of my friends was in an Uber ride the other day, and their Uber driver was ranting them about how Bill Gates is actually dead and he's a hologram. So that's just one person who doesn't know they're a QAnon person, right? And then like that they believe that Bill Gates is trying to infect people with basically eugenics and corona. There's all that. There's the vaccine aspect, and like you said, the mommy bloggers phenomenon is really an issue, because people will they're really invading the spirit health. QAnon is really like kind of
that's really the main part of my research, like in terms of the neo-Nazi components, is actually I look at the occult. That is what that section of my PhD focuses on. And actually there's all of these crazy historical links. I'm half a historian, so it's about this Aryan Iranian superpower, so tracing everything back to Iran, right? This is where this occult link comes in here, it's been co-opted by QAnon. So what you see is really historical conspiracy theories that were around during the Third Reich. World ice theory is one. The idea that what crashed into Roswell was actually the Nazi superbell. Yeah, all of these crazy conspiracy theories now merging through QAnon networks, where the argument now is that Q is actually JFK Jr.
Yeah, I've seen I've
Yeah.
seen the signs too at Trump rallies.
And you just, it's the way that I kind of feel like they just cling on to anything, QAnon people, and
Yeah.
they would make conspiracy theories. My colleague and I call it the bakers. So
Yeah,
they
yeah.
all the crumbs and bake a new conspiracy theory.
Yeah,
And
to amplify off that analogy, it's like QAnon's like the old country buffet of conspiracy theories. Like you can go in there and there's anything. You can go into this, there's anything you'd
crazy.
like. There's a conspiracy theory for every walk of life, every ideology, every extreme perspective. And it's really insane how they've lumped this together. And just quickly on this point, do you think, because what we saw recently, there's been a report that of course Russia and China were amplifying QAnon in the months around the election and after the election. But do you think that there is some, because I know given how it started to really rise in 2017, do you think that there is some Russian specific influence that we don't know about? Because the way in which it was so interconnected and so kind of well thought out in the way that they organized this, it feels to me that this couldn't have, that there has to have been, I know Russia did fuel it after it was created, but what do you think that there's any other links to the source of what Q is?
I have absolutely no idea. Like I have no idea who Q is. I think that the reason that it works in the UK, the reason people believe it is because of like Jimmy Savile, right? So you have these cases that have actually happened in the US, because as I said, I'm a historian. The conspiracy theories that I've written about are kind of MK Ultra, Project Bluebird, Artichoke, the false flag operation on Castro. And because these things have happened, it makes people now who aren't going to do all of the research more likely to believe them. So, it is kind of like a Project Monarch revamp where they're saying that it's Biden and it's Hillary Clinton. Like the latest, like Hillary Clinton killed Jeffrey Epstein and framed him for
even though it was in bars, DOJ.
But don't you think that because there's always something that's kind of true in the past that links it, like you get it with Benghazi, and there's always some sort
they tie into some corruption or some alleged corruption, like the Benghazi, like basically all that stuff was just ginned up. Basically Republicans, a lot of people on the right will gin up these fake conspiracies in the past. But one thing that is actually real that I think is one of the reasons why, especially my generation, is very skeptical and kind of some gravitate towards this. I have a friend who I lost to QAnon, and it started with that movie. I'm sure you do, given your research. Remember that movie, that conspiracy movie Zeitgeist?
Yeah.
So that was like the entryway for a lot of people in my age group, and it's like we all watched it. I didn't lose my mind obviously after watching it, but like my friend did, right, slowly. So essentially, what it is like they pour on the one kernel of truth, like you're saying. The reason why I bring up Zeitgeist is because 9/11 conspiracy theory, right? When the government lied to us about the WMDs, and when the government lied to us to justify our war, that broke all trust. So then suddenly these other conspiracies don't seem that far-fetched, right? Like if you were willing to take us in there, get hundreds of thousands of people killed, and obviously I believe that there are far-fetched and they're ridiculous, but that underlying, like I think you made a really good point of like they take a kernel of truth or a kernel of distrust and then they take it to the extreme. So then then it makes it so anyone that did the broader distrust in the system then leads to believing nothing you see in mainstream outlets and believing everything you see in this fringe.
Well, that's the thing, like you were saying, like if anyone actually just looks up what they were planning for Castro, and then how, I think in the end Kennedy pulled the plug on it, didn't he? And was just like, absolutely not. But kind of like pretending to blow up teenagers in planes and all of this crazy stuff to try and frame him. And then, as you said, it links to things that have happened because there was experiments and they trying to create these Manchurian candidates, super spies back in the day. They're like, oh yeah, no, that's obviously something that the government is capable of.
And because
just don't trust them, do they? You don't trust the government anymore.
exactly, and because like the Tuskegee experiments on black Americans, like black people actually had a justifiable skepticism, even though it wasn't vaccine related. But like essentially, it's one of those things where there's a lot that the government has done wrong, actually wrong, that leads people to this. So that's why I actually, think another part of combating this, online extremism and just extremism generally, is for the government to regain its trust by actually just being decent again. Like I think what Biden is doing is important, of just, trying to end the Reagan era and say, look, the government's actually not your enemy. It's here to help you. And
oh my God, Reagan, I actually found out that he was like making plans based off of his wife's astrologist. Like Hitler. So back in the Third Reich, the Nazi Party used to use like pendulum dowsers and astrologers to make their ideas, and actually Reagan. That's a complete side note. That's not even got anything to do with it.
But yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where it's like some of our leaders aren't making decisions based off the greatest instincts. In that example. So yeah, I mean, I think essentially when the government does better, then people will be less skeptical overall. Like you said, there's societal factors at play that leads people to extremism that technology accelerates. And I think that's kind of the bottom line of this overall conversation. So we're going on for a while now. I think we're gonna.
No, sorry for our conspiratorial wormhole, everyone.
Well, yeah, sorry everybody. But I mean, like this is just so interesting. I mean, when we live in this, we've got to just, I might take this offline and talk to you for another 15 hours, but about this topic. But I think everyone's got pretty solid, insightful view of your research, the work you're doing, how we can combat this, how we can regulate for the future, and what things we should keep in mind. So thank you, Ashton, for joining us. This was great. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah, and everyone will see you again on the panel we do at the end of this series. So thank you for being here, and thank you everyone for tuning in.